if you ever become a parent, there is a decision you're going to have to make pretty early on in your parenting. Like, you won't get very far into parentdom without having to figure out, at what point am I going to respond to my kid? Because some parents early on, and if this is you do you, boo, but like some parents, every little whimper out of their kid, they come running, right? They come running to go check on them, come around, what's happening? I heard they do this. They literally don't sleep at night because they're just waiting and expecting a little, to come out of the mouth of their little one. And that's fine. I can understand the attentiveness, and that's wonderful if that's you. My wife was sort of that way, is sort of that way. It's like she goes to sleep, but she goes to sleep expecting to hear my son just say something, expecting to hear him make a peep so she can come running. Your boy, on the other hand, is a little different. Like, I sleep very soundly. Very, very soundly. Like, tornadoes pass by, I ain't waking up. Like when it takes me a minute to get to sleep, but once I get to sleep, I'm out. I'm gone. I am not going to get up for much. And I certainly ain't going to get up for no little, none of that. That is not going to wake me up. However, as a parent, and you may think I'm a little cold-hearted, that's fine. But as a parent, there is a sound that will get me moving. There is a sound, even to this day, and my son can use words to, state his needs. Like, he doesn't need to just cry to get our attention. But there is a sound that will get me moving. If it happens in the middle of the night and I'm asleep, there is a level of sound, there's a level of intensity that can actually even wake up the soundest of sleepers. And that would be the sound of desperation. Now, every parent understands when their kid is like for real, right? Like, they are for real hurting. They are for real struggling. They are for real in need. And you can hear it in their cry. It's not just like, I think I want some water and I'm too lazy to go get it myself. There is something wrong going on, and I need you to step in and help me out. It's a sound of desperation. I've learned something about God in my years of just following him and trying to live my life according to his word and trying to just simply follow the example of Jesus. And it's this. I'd love for you to write this down today if you're taking notes. It's that God responds to the sound of desperation. He does. The God that we have just been singing about and singing to in these moments of worship, that God, the God who we believe not only gave his life, but got up out of the grave 3 days later, that God, he literally responds to the sound of desperation. Like, if you want to see God move, get desperate. In my life, like, not just reading a book, not just hearing about somebody else, but in my life with these two eyes, the ones behind the glasses, like with my eyes, I have seen in my life people be healed. Like, God will just heal them. I have seen provision come from only one source, and that source is God. It's like, it doesn't even make sense. I don't even know how it happened, but look at God. I've seen it happen. And to be honest, in my life, most of the time when I've seen this, it's been not here. It's been not in America. It's been, quite honestly, when I've been privileged enough to be in other countries. It's when people have maybe spent hours and hours and hours, maybe even days, waiting for the moment to get in a space where people are going to gather and lift up the name of Jesus, and God will do something incredible. It's when people come and there's no other hope, there's no other way, this ain't going to get fixed unless God steps in and does something, kind of desperation. And I've seen it. Now, the question I've been asked more times than I can count in response to the fact that I've seen that is, why don't you think God does that in America? Why don't we see that more here and now? I'll tell you, it comes back to one word: desperation. We ain't desperate. We don't usually find ourselves or allow ourselves to get to a place, to move to a point where we are desperate. But God responds to the sound of desperation. When people are desperate, when people cry out of desperation, he does not sit in heaven idly by going, isn't that neat, isn't that cute, I bet mama will come take care of him. No, he gets up from where he is and he will intervene on your behalf and mine when we get desperate. Today I want to spend a few moments studying the scriptures together to be quite honest, a very off-putting story about Jesus. In fact, for people that think the Bible is made up or people that think the Bible is concocted after the fact to somehow convince people of this, if you were trying to build a Loctite sort of case to say Jesus is perfect, he handled everything all great and all good and everything, you probably would not include the story that Matthew records as well as Mark in your writings. Because many people today will actually come across this story and they read it on the surface and it does not look well of Jesus. It does not look favorable of Jesus. And that's because, quite honestly, they don't understand the context. They don't understand the circumstance. They don't understand the culture. And so if you'll give me a few moments, even after we read it, I promise you it'll make a whole lot of sense to you as to why Jesus acts the way he does. But some of you, as soon as we get done reading Matthew 15, you're going to have problems with Jesus, why he treat people like this. And give me a second and we're going to get there. In fact, don't go Googling this passage right now, because I promise you 9 out of every 10 little blog posts by some little body who think they know what they're talking about is going to actually speak very negatively about Jesus because of Matthew 15, and they just don't know. But it's very important that we look here, because what you're going to see is you're going to see the interaction between Jesus and somebody that's desperate. Somebody that realized ain't no way this is going to get fixed. Ain't no way this is going to get handled. Ain't no way this is going to get worked out unless Jesus steps in. And I just believe some of us are gathered here today and there are situations in our life that look a lot like this. That we got issues, we got decisions to make, we got needs. And to be quite honest, we want God to do something and it doesn't seem like he's done anything yet. And so we want to throw in the towel on whether God is going to do it or not. And just be like, well, God ain't going to worry, I'm going to handle this myself. And I would just implore you for a few moments to not overlook the power of desperation. Matthew chapter 15, we're going to go there together. It's in your notes. If you want to look there, it'll be on the screen behind me. It also is in the Bible. Choose to look there too. Matthew 15, here's how it reads. It says, when Jesus left there, he withdrew. He was trying to get away. He withdrew to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came and kept crying out, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly tormented by a demon. This is where you're going to begin to have problems with Jesus. Just know. It says this, yet he did not say a word to her. So his disciples approached him and urged him, listen to this, send her away because she cries out after us. He replied to his disciples, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him and said, Lord, help me. He answered, it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she said, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus replied to her, woman, your faith is great. Let it be done for you as you want. And from that moment, her daughter was cured. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you were desperate? Like real desperate. I'm talking about like you didn't know how you were going to get through. You didn't know how you were going to get by. You didn't know how this was going to be fixed. You couldn't work it out. You weren't smart enough. You weren't trained in that. You didn't have enough money. You were actually for real desperate. Not like pseudo-desperate, not like Instagram desperate, but like really desperate. When I was 18 years old, I was in Bible college. I lived in this little city right outside of Dallas, Texas is where our Bible college was. And I was a full-time student that had 2 jobs working to pay for school and then also my own bills because I was on my own. I was taking care of myself completely. And I'll never forget, it was a Tuesday morning. I woke up to go to one of my jobs. One of my jobs at that time was I worked at a before school care. So this elementary and middle school, high school was actually all there. I ran with the team there before school care. So I would get up and I would leave our parking lot at our school at 5:15 every morning to get in my car and go to this place. So I could open it up, take care of the kids and do that. And that was one of my 2 jobs that I had to pay for everything. And I remember waking up on this Tuesday morning and my car was gone. It was gone. Like it had been in the parking lot when I parked it the night before, and it was gone that morning. Now, there ain't a whole lot of people responding to you when you're on a Bible college campus at 5:15 in the morning. Let me just go ahead and tell you. And I was very confused. I was shook, just like you were, because I thought my car had been stolen. Well, it took me about 36 hours to figure out what actually did happen. You see, I was paying for the car, but the car wasn't in my name. I was actually paying one of my parents because that car was in their name. Now, at the time, my parents were separated. They were divorced. It just wasn't finalized yet. They were fighting and hollering and doing all this kind of stuff like folks do sometimes when they get divorced. And what had happened is one of my parents decided that this car that I was paying for that was in their name, they wanted. And so rather than tell me, they had it abducted from our parking lot at my Bible college in the middle of the night. And I found out on a Tuesday morning trying to go to the before school care to take care of the little kids and feed them cereal. That's when I found out. It took me 36 hours to figure out what had happened. And I felt like there was nothing I could do to fix this. I'm 18 years old in Bible college. I'm 500 miles from what was home, but home didn't necessarily matter. And I remember being and feeling so desperate because I had to work to make sure I could stay in school and pay for school because my parents were paying for school. I was paying for school. And it's a Bible college, so they don't really give scholarships and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, it's loans and it's me. It's like, how many cars can I park backwards with my valet job? How much cereal can I feed to these little kids before school? Like, that was my life. That was my world. But it's like, if I can't get to these jobs, because these jobs are not near the Bible college, they are 30, 40, 50 minutes away every single time I got to go to work. Like, if I don't have wheels to get there, I can't do this. And so I started telling everyone what actually happened. I'm not talking about I came across a misfortune. I don't really know what happened. Man, my car got stolen. They couldn't find. Like, no. I told them exactly what happened. I was desperate. I didn't have the insurance of mom or dad to fall back on. I was desperate. The crazy thing is by that weekend, God opened a door because somebody heard about it. Somebody I didn't even talk to directly, but somebody who knew somebody I had talked to directly called me and said, "Hey, I have a little pickup truck. It's like a Ford Ranger, but it's the Japanese version. And if you want it, you can pick up the payment on it and have it. I have a company car. This thing has 18 months left of payments. If you'll pay the payments for 18 months, you can have it, and whatever it's worth is equity in your pocket." God provided. I believe that with all my heart. I drove that thing until it died. Actually, I drove it, it died, and then it ran for another 2 years. But every time I looked at that, I remembered that story. I remembered how desperate I was, but I also remember that there is no way by that weekend that an 18-year-old with no credit, no parent to co-sign, in a literally like a foreign land. I'd only lived in Texas for like 6 months at the time. Like in a foreign land would be able to have this work out except God and except desperation. Desperation. When you get desperate. You see, that's the way this woman walks in when Jesus passes through her area. She hears that Jesus is coming by, and she doesn't just try to come by like looking good. She doesn't just try to walk by and, hope maybe she can get a time with Jesus just to say hi after the worship experience is done. She doesn't do that. She comes in desperate because she realizes the only way her need is going to get met is if Jesus steps in and does something. See, she's not trying to get from Jesus because of her goodness, but because of his goodness. That's the mindset of somebody that's desperate. She didn't walk in talking to Jesus about how many times she had been to church, walk in talking to Jesus about how much money she had given to the offering, walk in talking to Jesus about how many times she had served, talking about how many people she had invited. She didn't walk in talking to Jesus about any of that kind of stuff. She walked in the highest form of respect that she could, in the most noble way she knew how. As a Gentile woman to a Jewish rabbi, she said, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." She's just saying everything that she can conjure up to get the attention of the only one who can help her. Why? Because she's desperate. She don't know where else to turn. She don't know what else to do. She don't know who else to pick up the phone and call. Ain't nobody going to come through and work this thing out. She has a need in her daughter that's now affected her. And she's like, "I need you, Lord, to help me." That's why when she finally gets face to face with Jesus and actually begins to make her plea, she does not begin by listing off her qualifications and how good she is. She just simply utters the words, "Lord, help me." She's desperate. See, I think sometimes for us, this is not the way we come to God when we're in need. We come to God with our list of accomplishments. We come to God and say, "God, well, man, I started the beginning of the year on that Bible reading plan. I mean, I made it like halfway through Genesis." We trying to put our goodness out in front of us. "God, I've been serving. I serve every other week at the church. I've been serving every other week at the church now for 3 weeks. So that means I've served once. But I've been serving, God. Come on. God, I gave that one time. God, you remember when I gave? Did you see me put that in it? I walked by the yellow box slow so you would see me, God. Did you see me?" And sometimes what we try to do is we try to offer defense. "God, this is why you should step in. God, this is why you should help me. God, this is why you should work this thing out," rather than coming in dependent. This woman did not come in like she was trying to stand before Judge Wapner at the People's Court and give her defense. She came in and said, "Lord, help me." Many of us, the only way we know how to come to God is with our defense. But God is not impressed by your accolades. He's not impressed by how much you've done or how much you think you've done. He ain't concerned with that. That does not blow his mind. That does not make him think, "Oh, I better step up and do something." But there is something in the heart of God that will move when someone comes in who's desperate. And that's the way this woman comes in here. She addresses him out of desperation. And Jesus is doing something here that's very important for you to take note of. Otherwise, you'll be mad at Jesus. Remember how I told you might get mad at Jesus? Remember how some of you, when I was reading this, you were like, "I don't like the way Jesus is talking to this woman. I don't appreciate this." Jesus does this thing quite often. Here it just stands out because we see some conversation around it that I'm going to tell you about in a second. But what he does here is something he does many, many times in his ministry. There's a woman who needs a miracle right here. But there are also some people who need to be taught at the same time. And the revelation that they need is just as miraculous as the physical that she needs. The only problem is you can't teach somebody who needs a miracle until their miracle is arrived, because they can't focus on the teaching. They have a need that's too big. That's why you can't grab somebody who's starving and try to tell them all kinds of stuff before you feed them. No. Feed them and then they might listen to you. And what Jesus does quite often is somebody will have a need and he will meet that need while at the same time teaching people who are observing in the process, which is exactly what Jesus does here. There are some issues in his disciples he needs to deal with. There's some things that, quite honestly, they need some miraculous work of God going on the inside of them to handle. The only problem is they're not as desperate as this woman to reach out to God for what they need changed on the inside. So Jesus is going to allow this to be an opportunity to not only meet her need, but to also help address the issues on the inside of them. And when you begin to see what Jesus is actually doing here, it makes a whole lot of sense. Because what Jesus does is, yes, he meets her need, but he doesn't just meet her need. He also meets the need that the disciples have to start seeing God for who he is, to start seeing the world the way they should see it. See, Jesus offers us some things that are unbelievable, but at at this time, he is allowing this desperation in this woman to be a life-changing moment for his disciples. A time that's quite honestly going to shape them for the rest of their lives. So what does he teach? What does he show? Well, he shows a couple things, and I want to share these with you today. See, Jesus is teaching them something that's still unbelievable even to us today. A few things about the nature and quality of God. And can I tell you, if you're here today and there's a need in your life, maybe you feel desperate. Maybe you haven't acted desperate yet, but if you were honest on the inside, you're like, I don't know how this is going to get worked out. You need to hear this today. If there's some of you here today, and quite honestly, sometimes the attention that God gives others but not you bothers you, you need to hear this today. Because Jesus is teaching his disciples while also meeting this woman's need. He's meeting their need and meeting her need at the same time. But he's letting them know some things about who God is. I'd love for you to write this down, that God has an inexhaustible compassion. That's what he's trying to show them. That the compassion in God cannot be exhausted. The heart of God cannot be used up. The love that God has for people, the love that he has for people that are his, the love that he has for his kids, the love that he has for all people, and it cannot be used up. He has an inexhaustible compassion. You say, how do you see that? Well, it's because in this little account here, Jesus not only has compassion on this woman, he has compassion on his disciples too. See, where you may miss it is you may miss in understanding the fact that Jesus actually responded exactly the way his disciples expected him to respond to this woman. See, Jesus was a rabbi and he was a Jew. This woman was a woman, obviously, and B, she was a Gentile. She was not of Jewish heritage. Jews in that day culturally did not talk to Gentiles. You see, that sounds like racism. It was. They did not talk to Gentiles. They had problems. You don't believe me? Do you remember the account that Jesus had where he bumped into a woman at the well who was from Samaria? And one of the first out statements of this woman is, I see that you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. What on earth are you doing even talking to me? See, Jews did not talk to Samaritans. Not only that, rabbis did not speak in public to women. They didn't. In fact, not even women within their own family, their wife, their daughters, their mother, they would not even speak in public to their women. Why? Because they were misogynistic. Yes. And that's the way his disciples thought he was supposed to act. See, the disciples were not troubled by what Jesus did in the way that he treated this woman by not responding when she cried out. The disciples were not troubled by that. That is what they expected him to do. The disciples started to get bothered when her cries started bothering them. Her cry didn't bother Jesus, though. Her cry never bothered him. You didn't read this in Matthew. You can go flip over to Mark too. You'll never see Jesus got frustrated with this woman yelling and told her, verily, verily, I say unto thee. You ain't gonna see that. King James for you. There you go. Shout out to y'all that like King James. You ain't gonna see that in there. Why? Because her cry didn't bother Jesus. It bothered the disciples. Why? Because the disciples had some issues on the inside of them that Jesus wanted to deal with. Jesus was God's son, but he came for all people. See, all Jesus did was speak out what the disciples expected him to say. The only problem is it sounds a little rough to us when you actually see it here in the flesh. This is the way a Jewish rabbi would treat a Gentile woman, but not Jesus. And so Jesus has the ability to know the end from the beginning. And so he understands, I can use this as a moment to show this faith in a Gentile woman, someone my little followers would never think would be a great example to them. I can use her faith to teach them about the kind of faith that they need, that God could change, that God could save, that God could do this for anyone, that God's love doesn't just go to Jewish people. It goes to all people. That his love, his compassion cannot be exhausted. See, Jesus had enough compassion for her need and the issues in his disciples. And he wanted to work with both of them. He wanted to deal with both of them. He wanted to step in with both of them. But sometimes for us, when we have a need, we don't see the world like this. Sometimes we think if God is not moving on our behalf, if God doesn't step in and fix the thing that's broken in our life, that God must not love us. God must have run out of love. No. No, he has inexhaustible compassion. You can't use up. You can't take all of the love that he has for people. But when you have a need, it's very easy to think that God doesn't care about you. I get it. I get that some of you have come in with a need today and you think, man, I don't even think God is concerned about me. I don't even think it's on his radar what's going on in my life. Yes, it is. And just because he doesn't answer when you want or how you want does not mean that he does not recognize your need. Because see, some of us think that the disciples brought this woman's need to Jesus' attention. Not at all. Because when Jesus actually turns and responds to his disciples, the woman who had been crying out overhears Jesus' statement to his disciples. Jesus had heard this woman crying from the beginning. He did not need his disciples to come and tell him, this woman is yelling. You gonna do something about this? He didn't need that. It was just that her desperation was bothering them. And that's just how Jesus needed it. Because he had compassion, not only for his disciples in their need, but for her in her need. See, the issue for some of us is that we don't see God moving, doing, changing, performing as fast as we would like. And so we wonder if he loves us. And what we forget is the second thing that Jesus shows us here. That God not only has this compassion that is inexhaustible, but God has an extraordinary purpose. God has a purpose in everything you go through, in everything you face that is bigger and more than you can actually see. He has a purpose. He has a purpose. The scripture says his ways are actually higher than our ways. His thoughts are not like our thoughts. He don't see it like you see it. He don't do it like you do it. And that's all right because he has a purpose that is extraordinary if you could trust him enough to walk in it. See, that's what's beautiful about this woman in this story. This woman is crying out to Jesus to do what only Jesus can do. And she does not give up when he does not respond as quickly as she would like. Because she's exhausted. I mean, she comes and cries out in the beginning, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. But yet her daughter is the one with the issue. Her daughter has just had this issue so long that now the weight of it is on her as a mom. And every parent understands that. Every time your kid gets sick. Every time your kid is struggling at school, anytime your kid may not be able to make the team that they wanted to make or get the chair that they wanted in band, every time that they have a little struggle along the way, you feel that. Well, her daughter was sick in such a severe way that the weight of it was on this mom. And she's like, God, I need you to do this now. And you can get mad at Jesus for not responding immediately, or you can recognize that God might have an extraordinary purpose in the process. Because even while she's crying, Jesus is doing something. Have you ever thought about that when you're facing difficulty? Have you ever thought about that maybe with the need that you have right now? What if God is using the time that you're crying to change things in other people that are around you? What if God is trying to use the moments where you are desperate, trying to use the moments where you are struggling, trying to use the moments where you are crying out, trying to use the moments where you don't know where to look, you don't know where to go. You need healing to come your way. You need provision to come your way. You need God to do what only God can do, and you feel like you're crying out and nothing is happening. Have you ever thought that maybe God has a purpose in that? That maybe he's not even just trying to do something in you, but he's trying to do something through you. That's why, watch me. Every time you go through something difficult, know this, that how you go through difficulty matters. If you have a faith in Jesus, can I tell you something? How you go through difficulty matters. See, what kind of difficulty? Any kind of difficulty. Why? Because we do not hope like those who do not have a hope. We have this hope as an anchor for our soul, firm and secure. We have this. And so when you go through difficulty, if you throw in the towel on God, can I tell you, you are missing the greater purpose that God might have in mind. Sometimes you think just because it got difficult for you, just because it got tough for you, God must have forgotten you. He didn't forget you. He has more compassion than you can imagine. You cannot exhaust all of it. He just sometimes has a purpose that you won't see until you get to the other side. My God, I'm helping somebody. Somebody, this is going to be reminded in you in 3 months when you face your next real difficulty. And maybe you're going to see it for the first time. Not as some attack from God, not as some God forgot me, not as some, oh my goodness, God must hate me, I knew I should have been to that one thing. No. Maybe it's something God is going to use to help somebody else. And so if you can just keep faith through it, if you can just keep believing through it, if you can just keep crying out like this woman, and she got more and more and more desperate. But she didn't take her eye off of her source. Because God always has an extraordinary purpose. This woman didn't know the heart of his disciples, and his disciples did not know the gravity of her need. But God had a higher purpose, an extraordinary purpose. And that becomes something that we can hold to every time we go through difficulty. That God's going to use this, and God is trying to, and he's shaping, and he's changing. That God not only has this inexhaustible amount of compassion, that God not only has this extraordinary purpose in it, but that also, write this down, that God has an unlimited supply. See, Jesus knew that he could handle two things at once. Jesus knew that he could handle the need that his disciples had, and he could handle the need of the Syrophoenician woman, as Mark will call her. He knew that he could handle both. Why? Because so many of us think that, like, maybe God is struggling. Like God's trying to make sure that check clear before he writes the next one. God ain't struggling. He gonna be okay. He has plenty in reserve. And just because he's meeting their need before your need does not mean that he does not have the ability to meet your need too. And just because he's doing something in their life doesn't mean that he's forgotten about you. And just because he blessed them does not mean that he has to now not bless you because, you know what, I'm a little short this month. No. He has more than you can imagine. And that's good news today because whatever you need, God has. So some of you need faith. God has more faith to deposit in your spirit than you can imagine. Some of you need compassion. Some of you need provision. Some of you need healing. Some of you need perspective. Some of you have big decisions to make and you have no idea what to do. And it's like, God just pick me up and drop me where I'm supposed to be. Help me to know. And God wants you to know, look, he is not short on supply. He just wants what's in you to be as desperate as this woman for him. Because power is not in your posturing, but in your persistence. power is not in how you stand and how you talk and what you say and what group you roll. No. Power is in your persistence. And the truth is, many of us do not have the persistence that we need to pursue God and what we need from God in this moment. Well, you say, God, I need you to help me. Well, it don't look like you helped me. All right, God, I'm out. I'm going to handle this myself. And maybe God wants you to go through a season of crying out to him so that it can be certain at the end of all this that it wasn't anybody else but him. Maybe God's going to allow this to go on for a year. Maybe he's going to allow you to have to fight and to have to struggle for years, so that when you get to the other side, you'll know it wasn't you, it was him. So that everybody around you could see your faith in the middle. And look at what's going on in my life. Look how it's falling apart. Your life isn't falling apart, it's coming together. Your life isn't breaking down, it's moving in the direction that it needs to, because there's a message that God wants to bring out of your life, but he needs a mess to bring a message. And so sometimes he's just simply allowing a moment so that way all the focus can get on him. You got to get desperate, though. Desperate. Because you know that God can hear your cry.